The latest now on the seemingly endless battle to retake Mosul. Iraqi soldiers have recaptured a notorious prison outside Mosul that had been under the control of Islamic State militants. The jail was reportedly used by ISIS to imprison abducted Yazidi women and to execute enemies. Iraqi troops reached the border of Mosul's old city this week. VOA's Heather Murdock has more from the scene of the latest fighting.
We're here in an area of central Mosul that Iraqi forces captured from Islamic State militants just early this morning, bringing their front lines to the borders with Mosul's old city. Soldiers say the fight for this area was brutal because as they capture new territories, Islamic State militants become more desperate, hurling mortars, suicide bombers, car bombs, and sniper fire at Iraqi forces. Islamic State militants destroyed these government buildings when they took over Mosul in 2014. The battle for Mosul's old city is expected to be one of the most complex parts of this war. Besides being densely populated, the streets are too narrow for military vehicles, so soldiers will have to enter on foot, and they expect IS to fight back bitterly. So far, Iraqi forces have reached only part of the southern borders of the old city, and troops here are waiting for more divisions to fight their way to the border before moving forward again. Reporting from Mosul, Iraq, I'm Heather Murdock, VOA News.
And joining us now by phone from Mosul, VOA correspondent Heather Murdock, who filed that report you just heard. And right here in Washington, I'm joined by our Pentagon correspondent, Carla Babb. It's good to have both of you ladies. Heather, I'm going to start with you. As dangerous, as ominous as those streets in Mosul appear, it certainly seems as if Islamic State may be already firmly on the losing ground here, or is it still too soon to say that?
There's a lot of momentum here, and the soldiers of all of the various groups fighting very strongly believe that they are winning and the victory is imminent. It is true, however, that the Islamic State fighters are fighting back harder than ever, and there is some apprehension about the battle to come because as they enter the old city, it is expected to be the most logistically difficult battle of the fight for Mosul so far, and no one knows what they're going to find when they get in there. It's an incredibly crowded area. It's an old Islamic State stronghold, and nobody knows how much support they have within the city. And, of course, there's tunnels, booby traps, and tons of places for them to hide.
So there's still a lot of work ahead. Carla, as Heather mentioned, though, is momentum now on the side of Iraqi forces?
Absolutely. This is something that Iraqi forces have been working at for weeks and weeks. They've been preparing for this for months, and now their plan is starting to unfold. As you can see, based on not just Mosul, but in all of Islamic State territory, it has shrunk significantly. They've gone, Islamic State fighters have gone from their height of over 30,000 estimated fighters to now just estimates of about 12,000 to 15,000.
So can you say that as a result of sort of being on the losing end here, are they suffering in terms of recruitment?
Well, they certainly are in terms of reports that have been coming out. You've been hearing that their leaders have been fleeing not only Mosul but also Raqqa. That last major road out of West Mosul was taken just in the recent days, so they don't really have a clear way out. And so their leaders are kind of secretly fleeing to go to areas. General Votel has suggested perhaps the Euphrates River Valley, an area in between Raqqa and Mosul, where they can try to regroup. But Iraqi forces and Syrian forces are prepared for that as well.
They're firmly on the run, it seems. Heather, speaking of being on the run, in one of your reports from Mosul, one of the people you interviewed said, if you trap a cat in a closet, he's going to fight like hell to get out. I'm wondering, is a desperate enemy a more dangerous enemy? What do you think?
It does seem that Islamic State militants are using a tremendous amount of weaponry, more so than in the past. And the theory, and at least the military knowledge, is that they're in a small area, so they're more condensed. They don't really have as many places to go, so they're not fleeing to the west as they had when they were fighting in the east. So they're fighting back with everything they have. And you can see it. You just go to the front lines for 5 minutes in this fight compared to the last fight, and you can see more mortars, hear more gunfire. They're battling like their lives depend on it, and they do.
Yeah, no, it could actually get even more dangerous as time goes on, the more desperate the enemy. Now, Carla, the administration is said to be considering a proposal to deploy as many as 1,000 additional reserve troops. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that is right. The official line from the Pentagon is that the president is exploring multiple options. But from what I'm hearing from my sources, this 1,000 option sent to Kuwait, this is the option they're really focusing on. They're just waiting on the green light from the president. The Pentagon would send 1,000 Army guys. Army guys have been approved to go to Kuwait, and they would be available to help in either Iraq or Syria. That they still have not come out with, but they would be providing things like artillery to our allies who need them to push Islamic State out of their last strongholds.
How does this differ from the previous administration's approach towards fighting ISIS?
Well, it's a nuanced escalation. It's not like he's doubling the amount of troops or tripling. It's just a 1,000, a few hundred more troops coming in to help the situation, because the goal of the former administration and this administration is to make the victory be by, with, and through local forces. The only difference is this administration seems to think that there is a few more troops needed than the last administration, but no one is trying to repeat the previous Iraq war where there were tens of thousands of U.S. troops coming in and invading.
Awe component.
The U.S. has gone through that. That doesn't work. It has to be local forces, and I think that that is something that you're also seeing in the Syria side, whereas the U.S. has experienced this coming in and being treated as invaders to do this. Turkey is now trying to come in, and they've taken al-Bab from Islamic State forces, and they want to be very much involved in Raqqa. The U.S. is cautioning that this needs to be Syrians, local Syrians, that it liberates Raqqa, and that's why still to date there's no finalized plan for how Turkey is going to be involved in the Raqqa operations, because they're still trying to figure out that difference of opinion there versus we want to help liberate or locals help liberate.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about the timeline, what we might expect in Raqqa. But Heather, we're starting to hear a little bit more about some of the atrocities that were committed by Islamic State militants there. There are reports now that Islamic State may have, in fact, used chemical weapons to injure some of the people in some of the neighborhoods there in Iraq. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I have visited personally 5 bomb sites of weapons that, while international organizations have not confirmed that they're chemical weapons, they are clearly poisonous. I've met victims and families and victims on the street. They're not like, we're not talking about weapons of mass destruction. We're talking about homemade chemical bombs that military authorities have said maybe have sulfur. Some have confirmed chlorine in some of them. The ICRC says that the symptoms of the people they saw are consistent with mustard gas poisoning. We've also heard, and the consistency of the bombs and the smells point to the fact that it's probably different substances. But they're homemade bombs. They make people very sick. Some people are hospitalized. Some people are in critical condition. And entire neighborhoods are terrorized and ill and have bad skin and can't breathe at night. So it's really disturbing to the people who live in eastern Mosul, who thought the war was at least partially over.
Carla, I'm wondering if there are any kind of similar reports of use of chemical weapons coming out of Raqqa in Syria. What kinds of tactics is Islamic State using in Raqqa in Syria to maintain control of that population?
Well, there's not a lot getting out of Raqqa right now. We have to focus on local reports and not so much coming out of the Pentagon on that. The Pentagon is focused on surrounding Raqqa, and they're still trying to iron out the details, as I mentioned, with Turkey on how to move forward there. As you remember, Raqqa is the de facto capital of the Islamic State, so this is a big deal for them.
Crown for Islamic State.
And so the top commander, the top U.S. commander on the ground, said in February that Raqqa and Mosul would both fall in about 6 months, was his estimate. So we'll have to see if that's going to happen.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking to you about that well before the 6 months is up. Thank you so much to Heather Murdock and Carla Babb.